Hi, Mr. Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I have an interesting question from a subscriber. Or at least I think the person's a subscriber. I'm maybe presuming too much. She asked the question of what does it mean to be a progressive? Like I took it as an objective sense. Like if you were saying, what does it politically mean to be a progressive? Because I'm just saying we throw the word around a lot. It was a video that it was on, and it was progressive this, progressive that. Well, it's a fair question. I said, well, wait a minute, what does that even mean? I probably should have wrote this answer down a little bit more as opposed to just doing the video on it. But this is my thoughts. I think this is a difficult question to answer, which is kind of why I'm making this video on it. Part of this is philosophical. Part of it is politically operative, if that makes sense. Like, so, any idea of a progressive, yes, somebody can give you, they can say, here are the traits that are associated with it. These are the policies. But that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't really get you there. You can have somebody who takes a particular political position, but the reasoning they're taking that position differs wildly. Like, for example, if we're talking about progressive, we're talking about policy, then we're talking about the lens that the person is using to measure the world around it. All right, fair enough. But understand, just because you have that particular lens, that lens may be among multiple people at the very least similar. But their own biases, their inherent biases, and I'm not talking about biases like they're paid to take a particular position or their job depends on them taking a particular position. I'm talking about a sandbox world, a model ideal environment where you have these people and these people for the most part are being earnest about their positions. Even within that, even with people who are similar, you're still going to have weighing differences. Meaning somebody may say, yeah, I believe everybody should have health care. But the plan he comes out to cover that may be different than the other guy. Does that make him any less progressive because of the way he weighed those particular things in order to come to a particular conclusion differs from somebody else's? Like, I guess I'm saying, just going by what they advocate is not necessarily the indication of a progressive. I mean, even within that, it's somewhat of a slippery slope. I mean, so it's almost like it's a difficult thing to kind of just put down. It's not a flat answer. Like, it's not like saying 42. It's more so an equation. It's more so an amalgam of things. How the person sees a particular thing. What weight the person puts on certain things. Does this person put weight on life, on capital? At what degree does it no longer become progressive? You see what I mean? This becomes a difficult question to answer. For that matter, I think for the most part, I think the thing that's operational, or the thing that's useful within the naming itself, is if you're making this case that to some degree you're talking about reality or your conception of reality. You're making this point of saying, in my ideal world, the world that I can foresee, if things were functioning the way they should be functioning, this is how this world compares to the world in which I exist. The difference between those two things, for the most part, is going to make a determination on what you think is good versus what you think is bad in your particular society. Now, say you reach that conception. Say you push that society forward. You're still going to argue in that society. There is no utopia. In that new society, that society that's ideal to you, there are going to be arguments that take place. What does a progressive look like in that particular society as opposed to the society that we're in now? What degree, what position, what opinion, what's that one thing that makes the choice to say, okay, that guy is no longer progressive? Is that even where you want to go? I mean, I get your point in asking it. It's trying to essentially say, look, how do I identify one versus the other in this case? And that's a fair point. I would make the case that if you're going to do that at all, the only value in it, or the main value in it, is an overarching goal to what you want to accomplish. Meaning, there's never a situation where you're going to be able to nail down a particular person's biases or whatever else to say, this is what a progressive is. Even that's just the model. What you would be able to do is to at least say, these are the goals that we're trying to espouse. These are the goals that we're trying to accomplish. That's the best you're going to get. Now, what that gets you is everybody under that particular banner functioning for a particular society. It doesn't require you to force people to be a particular thing. It only requires you that all of you guys are working towards the same ends. So in this case, the question becomes, what's the society you believe should look like? In my case, I think you should have healthcare. I think school should be, for the most part, covered by the society that's running that particular society. I don't think people should suffer in regards to the way they work or the way they run their lives. I don't think their lives should be controlled by capital at all. At least not in the sense of scarcity. Like, you need to make a paycheck, so you need to work a job that you absolutely hate. Or if you do lose that job, you somehow are insufficiently worthy of health care and food and a house or place to stay. So for me, I look at it and say, okay, what's the society that gets those particular things fixed and those particular things resolved? For me, this idea of progressivism, or this idea of what does it mean to be a progressive, has more to do with what's the world that you want? How does that world relate to what you got? And what are the changes and the things you need to do to scoot a little further to the world that you actually want? Part of that is defining the problem. I always make the case that the problem is capitalism. Part of it is defining what things need to take place to get me to that conceptual vision of the world. Because understand, when people are talking about policy, when these arguments, these ideological arguments come up, it's not the argument itself. That argument is based off of something. That argument, if it's being honest and genuine, it's not being corrupted by something else. It's based off, this is what I believe an ideal world looks like, versus the other person saying, this is what I believe an ideal world looks like. If we're having the conversation on what's progressive, I'd imagine that that's probably where you're going to end up. What's the ideal world that these people believe things should look like? And are the people under this banner functioning in a way to get you that ideal world? Now, if you can't make an agreement on what the ideal world is, then the definition of progressivism goes away. It doesn't mean anything. I'm making this point that in coming to some arrangements, we need to stop with this thing of, look, we need to collectivize. Like, I need to be specific when I make this point. Right now, you have all these groups, disparate groups, functioning amongst themselves. So you have environmentalists. They're doing their own thing. They're in their own sandbox. They're puttering along, fighting a good fight. You have Black Lives Matter. Again, doing their own thing, puttering along, fighting the good fight. You may have immigration issues. You may have transgender, whatever. All of these disparate issues, fight for 15, whether you're talking about just unionization. But understand, all of these things are not disparate things. All of those things relate to the same thing. We're talking about the model that we're existing in. You guys are fighting aspects of the model, not necessarily coming to some kind of consensus that, hey, the problem is the model. For instance, if we're having a conversation about the environment, you're talking to an environmentalist. An environmentalist is making this point that, hey, we need to stop these pipelines. Okay, fair enough. Hey, it's a crummy idea when we're doing a trade policy and we're shipping grapes from Cuba to California, when California is just as capable to grow their own grapes. We don't necessarily take the cost, the environmental damage, into the cost itself, because capital is not the same thing as your environment, your physical world. Capital is conceptual. So you could come up with rules and regulations that allow you to do all of this stuff, this damage, the amount of money you're paying for gas and everything else. You're taking an environmental toll. But the cost of doing it is not expressed. So the environmentalist is making this argument of, well, we need to change people's behavior. How are you going to do that? There isn't a profit motive built into the model itself that says shipping that thing across there is profitable to me. It hurts your environment because you, for the most part, understand, whether you acknowledge it or not, you understand that the profit, the thing that they're seeking, is not real. They don't get that. For the most part, they don't even care because it suits their self-interest. It's like being in the Matrix, where the guy was like, I know this steak isn't real, but the steak case is really damn good. It's the same thing. I know this profit isn't real, but what it affords me in this particular society, this arrangement of society, is pretty damn good. How are you going to pry his hands off the oil lever? How are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Beyond that, let's go to the other one. Black Lives Matter. Martin Luther King kind of made this point that any kind of justice, social justice, has to have an economic component. Meaning that because you're in a capitalistic society, you yourself will never be free unless you're free in that model being a capitalistic society. If you don't have money, you can't participate. Meaning, part of your issue, even though it's civil rights, even though it's, I don't want to be shot by a goddamn cop just because I'm walking home, or just, I don't want my kid shot because he's walking home. Part of that struggle is economics. It's economics. It is indistinguishable. And all of these disparate issues that these people are fighting about all boil down to the model that they're in. What are the incentives? Do you believe people are just horrible people? Or are people incentivized to behave a particular way? That is a big difference. Your human nature is not necessarily corrupted, but your human nature can be corrupted. There's a difference in those things. You're not necessarily born corrupt. It's just a particular society is geared a particular way. It's arranged a particular way. The way you see things, the way you think about things, how you weigh them in your head for the most part. It's slanted a particular way because the society is slanted a particular way. You're built in with certain biases that allows those incentives to actually be incentives. The problem is the model itself. You need to break that model. And look, all I'm saying is you're forever living in this this fantasy world. You're trying to fight these separate things as if those things are separate. They're not separate. They're the same thing. It's all the same thing. You're fighting the same thing. I'm making this point that if you're going to have a banner, if you're going to say progressive, be under that banner and move towards a consensus, move towards an idealized society. Full well understanding that utopia does not exist. Any idealized society is also going to be contested in that new society. The goal is just to get you to a better place. That's the point of it. I would make the case that that's the point of having a label of progressivism or anything else. It's to say, all right, this is the vision that we're shooting for. This is our vision. This is a clear, articulated vision of what we want. You can call that a platform. You can call that just, this is the society we think it's going to be. This is our mission statement. But that needs to be understood. And it can't be frittered away in all these protests and all this other stuff. It needs to be very specific and very understood. It needs to be focused on the majority and the whole. I would make the case that part of this is just looking at reality and just giving an objective view of reality without entanglements and making shit up to make yourself feel better. It's being honest. It's just having an honest appraisal of your environment, your surroundings. Yes, that's going to be skewed to a certain degree just because of your person. But at the very least, it's not going to be skewed because somebody is buying you off, or somebody is saying, hey, here's this particular job, or they're dangling this particular carrot. All of those things, if they care about it, all of those groups, for the most part, are considered progressives. Even though all of those groups are functioning in different capacities. The point I'm making is, what they're talking about, though, is the same thing. They just don't quite realize it yet. And they haven't come together to kind of make that point that, holy shit, we're talking about the same thing. When they say that, then it becomes a hell of a lot easier to define what a progressive is. Right now, it slips, it slides. I'll make the case that the vision that I articulated, this idea of we're going to have a society that for the most part functions towards people, not capital, period. If you're looking for, I would say, probably a unifying singular theme that does not necessarily give you the richness of the totality, meaning you're not necessarily getting the whole, but if you're looking for like just a theme, just a thing that seems to replicate itself over and over and over and over again, when I'm talking to people who consider themselves progressives, is that thing. People matter. This other fictional shit does not. And a society should be arranged around just identifying the worth of an individual. Because look, if your society functions in a way that allows somebody to be self-actualized, meaning society acknowledge that this person's life has value, and as a society we want to help this person to become self-actualized, however that person defines that term, then in some way it allows you to be the same way. It's not necessarily this thing of a society assisting somebody in some way is hurting the society as a whole. No, all of you are in that boat together. If you are helping that person, you yourself are being helped. It is full well understanding that. There is a level of self-interest into being helpful. That's my point. If you're looking for some kind of buttoned down version or some understanding of progressivism that's basic, regards and from a political standpoint, I would say that's probably the thing that you're going to continuously find. People matter more than profits. All of these movements are stressing the same thing. They're not articulating that way, but that is the thing they're stressing. And again, I'm making the point that all of these movements are actually fighting, for the most part, some degree of capitalism or some face of it, without necessarily attacking the whole thing and without coming together and making a decision on how they want to attack that whole thing, because that's the conversation they should be having. Political movements are great, but political movements to what end? To what end? What's the point? The point is to win. Not to draw, not to get up to speed. The point is to win. The point is to win. Stop this hamster wheel. If progressivism is going to be a thing and it's going to be an actual movement, it should define itself to some degree, at the very least to some degree in the sense of the world that it's trying to create. That image is what the model would be. That's what it would be. Right now, that model is somewhat sketchy. It's hard to necessarily put a thumb in it and say, this is what it is. Is Sanders the model of progressivism? What if you get into the military part? And what about Keith Ellison? Can they defend their military records under a guise or a lens of progressivism? That's a hard case to make. Like, it's hard to answer that question. This is kind of the point I'm getting at. It's much easier to say, what is the model that you're trying to create within that society? What is that ideal society that that particular group is trying to create? It should be consistent with what they're saying. If they're telling you one thing and it's not consistent with the model themselves, you can interrogate what they're saying on whether or not they're being credible in the things that they're saying. Because what they're saying should make sense in getting you to that particular world. Focus on the model. Focus on where you're trying to go, not necessarily on the identities of the people. Is what they're saying getting you to the world you want? If it's not, then what the hell does it matter if they're being progressive or not? What does it matter? What does it matter? The point is to change the world. That's the point. If you want to call yourself a progressive and you want to do that, that's awesome. If you don't want to call yourself a progressive and you want to do it and you're still trying to get to my vision of the world, I don't care what you call yourself. I care about getting to that particular ideal environment that I think is the best case scenario. So, look, again, that's not a flat value, that's an equation. But I was trying to give a little bit more context to the question, why I think the question is difficult to answer. I'm not trying to necessarily be overly esoteric about it, but I do kind of want to get across this idea of, let's discuss what we want the world to look like. You can't get to it unless you define what that world looks like. That's the only point I'm getting at. Alright guys, thank you.